People get ready, ready, ready.
The music business has always had two sides. The side you hear on the radio, the hits, the glory, the sold-out arenas. And the side that happens in the back office, the contracts you sign when you are 19 and broke. The managers who take percentages that shouldn't exist. The label deals structured so that the bigger you get, the more you owe. This is the story of 10 R&B bands who gave everything to the music and had everything taken from them by the people who were supposed to protect them.
Put your hands together. Come on.
Corrupt managers, fake label deals, royalties that never arrived, names stolen and sold to imposters. These are not rumors. These are lawsuits, court records, depositions, and documented facts. Every song is real. Let's go. Number 10, The Coasters, Yakety Yak, 1958.
They got the papers and the train.
The Coasters were the greatest comedy act in the history of rock and roll. Yakety Yak, Charlie Brown, Poison Ivy. Along Came Jones. Back-to-back-to-back hits. Written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, released on Atlantic's Atco subsidiary between 1957 and 1959.
You just put on your coat and hat.
The group had such a perfect chemistry between their four vocalists and the material Lieber and Stoller created for them that music historians have described those records as playlets, fully formed miniature theatrical performances disguised as pop songs. The Coasters were the first R&B group to hold the top position on the Billboard pop chart with 2 consecutive singles. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987, and then the Parasites arrived. The same New York promoter, Larry Marshak, who ran the fake Drifters operation, also ran fake Coasters and fake Platters touring groups simultaneously. He recruited former members of older lineups, registered the names as trademarks, and sent counterfeit versions of these legendary groups onto stages across America and the UK. For years, fans paid full ticket price to see what they believed were the real Coasters. Instead, they saw whatever lineup Marshak had assembled that week. The real original members, Carl Gardner, who had sung on every hit, spent decades and enormous legal fees fighting to establish that the group touring under their name had nothing to do with them. The Truth in Music Act was eventually passed in 34 states specifically because of what Marshak did to the Coasters, the Drifters, the Platters, and others. Carl Gardner had to fight for his own name in a courtroom. He had already given it to the music. He shouldn't have had to. Number 9, The Platters, The Great Pretender, 1955. The title of this song is almost too perfect given what happened next. The Platters were the first African-American pop supergroup. Only You, The Great Pretender, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, My Prayer. In the mid-1950s, they were the most successful vocal group in America, crossing over to both black and white audiences at a time when that crossover was commercially and culturally extraordinary. Their manager, Buck Ram, was also their songwriter and producer. He wrote Only You and The Great Pretender. He was genuinely talented. He was also setting up a legal structure that would hollow out the group from the inside. In 1956, Ram quietly assumed ownership of the Platters name through a company he created called Five Platters Incorporated. The original members each held a 20% stake. But Ram's lawyers had drafted the structure so that control of the company, and therefore the name, gradually consolidated around Ram and his associates. By 1966, one associate named Jean Bennett had acquired control of the company from most of the singers. Only one original member, Herb Reed, kept his stake. And Herb Reed spent the next 45 years fighting in courtrooms across 3 states to establish that he, as the man who first used the name in commerce in 1953, had the superior right to it. The other original members tried to tour and were sued for trademark infringement. Tony Williams, the lead voice on The Great Pretender, the voice that sold those records, was sued by the company his own manager had set up. Reed finally won in Las Vegas in 2011. He was 83 years old. He said it was the greatest accomplishment of his life. He had to fight 60 years to be recognized as the Platters. Number 8, The Drifters, Under the Boardwalk, 1960. Number 7, The O'Jays, Backstabbers, 1972. The irony here is almost too heavy to carry. The O'Jays recorded Backstabbers in 1972, a song about people who smiled to your face while plotting against you behind your back. It went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became one of the defining anthems of the Philadelphia soul era. It made Philadelphia International Records and its founders, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, a commercial and cultural institution. For 30 years, the O'Jays were Philadelphia International's flagship act. Love Train, For the Love of Money, I Love Music, Used to Be My Girl. Eddie Leverett's voice was the signature sound of the label through the entire decade. Then in January 2008, O'Jays founding members Eddie Leverett Sr. and Walter Williams filed a federal lawsuit in Philadelphia against Philadelphia International Records and its owners, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. The lawsuit accused them of theft, larceny, and misappropriation of royalties. The specific allegation that Philadelphia International had kept $47,000 in royalties owed to the group. Money held back to pay the label's own legal bill in an unrelated matter. The group demanded $3 million in back payments and punitive damages. Gamble and Huff said they were blindsided by the suit and that the O'Jays were owed nothing. The case was settled out of court. A separate former member, Sammy Strain, who sang with the O'Jays for 16 years, filed his own $15 million lawsuit claiming he never received a single royalty payment during his entire tenure with the group. The song was called Backstabbers. The label owners said they had no idea. The lawsuit said otherwise. Number 6, The Four Tops, Reach Out, I'll Be There, 1966. The Four Tops formed in 1953. They stayed together with the same 4 members, Levi Stubbs, Abdul Duke Fakir, Ronaldo Benson, and Lawrence Payton, for over 40 years. without a single lineup change. That kind of loyalty and stability in the music industry is almost supernatural. And yet, Duke Fakir was still writing op-eds in 2018. 65 years after the group formed, begging Congress to fix a royalty law that had been allowing digital radio stations to broadcast their music for decades without paying them a cent. Federal copyright law did not protect sound recordings made before 1972. Digital stations like SiriusXM and iHeartRadio played Reach Out, I'll Be There and I Can't Help Myself and Bernadette for years. Massive to profitable airplay while paying zero performance royalties to the artists who made them. The songwriters collected, the publishers collected, the artists received nothing. Fakir wrote, "These are records that people count on to pay rent, buy groceries, cover medical bills." He wasn't speaking abstractly, he was speaking about himself and his bandmates. The Music Modernization Act of 2018 finally extended federal copyright protection to pre-1972 recordings. But by that point, Lawrence Payton had been dead for 20 years, and Levi Stubbs, who recorded Reach Out, I'll Be There with a voice so powerful it once made a crying woman stop mid-sob at a concert to listen, had spent his final years unable to perform due to illness. They formed in 1953. Congress protected their music in 2018. That is 65 years of exploitation with a signature. Number 5, TLC, Waterfalls, 1995.
Come on.
Here is the specific number that explains everything. 56 cents. That is what TLC received, split 3 ways among all members for every album sold under their original Layface Records contract. 56 cents per album, divided 3 ways in a deal negotiated by the same person who was also their manager, also the wife of the label's co-founder, also the owner of the production company that held their publishing. Her name was Perry Pebbles Reed. T-Boz, Left Eye, and Chili were 19 and 20 years old when they signed. They were given no copies of their own contracts. They used the same attorney as Pebbles when the agreements were negotiated. That attorney had a direct conflict of interest the group did not know about. The production deal, management deal, and recording contract were all held within the same company structure, meaning that every expense the label charged back to the group was also money going to their manager. Airline tickets, hotel rooms, food, clothes, music video costs, all of it charged against their royalties. The bigger they got, the deeper in debt they went. On July 3rd, 1995, 5 days before Waterfalls hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, TLC filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy. They owed $3.5 million. Their album, Crazy, Sexy, Cool, had sold 14 million copies. It remains the only album by a female group to receive diamond certification from the RIAA. They bought back their rights to their own name for $3 million. Pebbles denied wrongdoing. The case was settled.
Come on, come on.
Left Eye died in 2002. T-Boz and Chili are still performing as TLC. They still don't own Left Eye's masters. Number 4, The Temptations, My Girl, 1964. The Temptations were Motown's most versatile, most enduring, most musically diverse group. And inside their story is one of the most heartbreaking personal destructions in music history. A story that began with choreography rules and ended with a gun in a parking lot. Paul Williams was a founding member of the Temptations. He co-created the group's famous synchronized choreography. A signature visual element that Motown turned into a brand standard so rigid that performers were fined for deviating from it on stage. Not reprimanded, fined. Real money taken from their already tight earnings. Motown controlled every aspect of the Temptations' professional presentation. Their stage outfits, their movements, their media appearances, their public statements. The group received advances against royalties, standard practice, but the royalty rates negotiated in their original contracts were extremely low by industry standards, and the recoupment process was structured so that the advances were nearly impossible to pay off. Paul Williams struggled with alcoholism and health problems throughout the late 1960s. Motown kept him in the group long after his health made performing increasingly difficult, because replacing him meant acknowledging a problem they preferred not to discuss publicly. He left the Temptations in 1971. He had no financial safety net. The royalties from My Girl, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, I Wish It Would Rain, and dozens of other hits were not generating meaningful income for him. On August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found dead in his car of a self-inflicted gunshot wound 3 blocks from Hitsville, U.S.A. He was 34 years old. He was broke, and his family received no death benefits from the label he had made famous. Number 3, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, If You Don't Know Me By Now, 1972.
Thank you.
Harold Melvin built the Blue Notes. He recruited the singers, maintained the group, booked the gigs, kept them alive through a decade of near misses before they landed at Philadelphia International Records. Then in 1971, Gamble and Huff heard Teddy Pendergrass, the drummer who had been singing lead because the previous lead singer quit mid-tour, and everything shifted. If You Don't Know Me By Now went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1972. Wake Up Everybody, The Love I Lost, Bad Luck. Every hit was driven by Pendergrass's voice.
All the things.
The group was nominated for multiple Grammys. They were among the most important acts on the most important black-owned label in America. And Harold Melvin was watching his own group get repositioned around a man he had initially hired to play drums.
Baby, I know the difference.
Philadelphia International billed them as Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, but the marketing, the promotional push, the magazine coverage all centered on Teddy Pendergrass. When Pendergrass left in 1975 to go solo, He did so with the label's full support. Gamble and Huff continued producing him as a solo artist. He became a superstar. Harold Melvin tried to continue with the Blue Notes. Without Pendergrass, without the label's real promotional weight behind him, the hits stopped coming. He sued Philadelphia International for unpaid royalties and breach of contract. He spent his final years performing oldies shows and fighting for money the label owed him. He died in 1997 of a stroke. He never received what the Blue Notes had earned.
I've got mine.
The song was called If You Don't Know Me By Now. Harold Melvin spent 20 years trying to get Gamble and Huff to know him well enough to pay him.
It's funny we all got.
Number 2, The 5 Stairsteps. O.O.H. Child, 1970.
Ooh, child, things are gonna get easier.
O.O.H. Child is one of the most hopeful, genuinely comforting records ever made. Things are gonna get easier. Things will get brighter.
Child, things are gonna get easier.
It was released in 1970 at the height of the civil rights movement and anti-war protests, and it sounded exactly like a hand reaching through the darkness.
Someday when your head is much lighter.
The 5 Stairsteps were a family group from Chicago. 5 siblings ranging from age 7 to 18 when they started performing. Their father, Clarence Burke Sr., managed them. Their mother played piano. They had been recording since 1966 for a series of labels without the kind of massive hit that would change their lives. Then O.O.H. Child hit number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1970. It was an extraordinary record. What happened next was an education in how the music industry destroys families. The group was signed to Buddha Records, a New York label run by Art Cass and Neil Bogart. Buddha's accounting practices were notoriously opaque. The 5 Stairsteps were never given clear accounting statements. Their father managed them, but had no entertainment industry experience and no legal representation sophisticated enough to audit what the label was actually doing with the money. The group fractured over money disputes. Members came and went. A reorganized lineup recorded for Curtis Mayfield's Curtum Records, where, according to family members, similar royalty transparency issues persisted. The family sued multiple times over the following decades. The royalties from O.O.H. Child, a song still used in films, commercials, and television constantly, were largely inaccessible to the original performers. 5 siblings gave the world one of the most beautiful songs of the century. The century did not give them back what they deserved. Number 1, The Impressions, People Get Ready, 1965.
People get ready.
This is the story of the greatest R&B songwriter of his generation, and the system that stole his work before he was old enough to know what publishing meant.
All you need is a faith.
Curtis Mayfield formed the Impressions in the late 1950s in Chicago. He wrote every major hit. It's All Right, Keep on Pushing, Amen, People Get Ready. People Get Ready was named by Rolling Stone as one of the 500 greatest songs ever recorded. It became a civil rights anthem. Bob Dylan called it one of the best songs he'd ever heard. Mayfield signed with ABC Paramount as a teenager. His publishing, the ownership of his actual songs, the asset that generates royalties every time a record is played, covered, or licensed, was signed away in that initial deal for almost nothing. He did not fully understand what he was giving up. He had no lawyer who explained it to him. He spent years trying to reclaim it. He eventually founded his own label, Curtin Records, specifically to control his own work going forward. But the early catalog, the Impressions hits from the late 1950s and early 1960s, remained in other hands. Come on, everybody, join in. Say, people can. Then, on August 14, 1990, Curtis Mayfield was performing at an outdoor concert in Brooklyn when a lighting rig fell on him during a storm. He was paralyzed from the neck down. He spent the last 9 years of his life unable to move, recording vocals by lying on his back and singing in short phrases that were later assembled in the studio. All you need is faith. The royalties from those early songs stolen through a publishing deal he was too young and too uninformed to fight, were still not fully his. He died in 1999. His estate continued the legal work he had started.
You have some, we may be young.
The man who told an entire generation that People Get Ready spent his final decade flat on his back, still waiting for the system to be ready for him.
Yeah, why don't we all get together and give me a great big amen?